there are certain companies that have very specific rules that don't really apply elsewhere. Financial regulations on big banks, for example. They're very specific laws which kind of seem a little, they're sort of tailor-made because of the kind of industry that it is. Laws around like insider trading and stuff like this. It's very specific. Laws about what newspapers are allowed to publish, this kind of stuff. Like, I mean, what do you make, for example, of this argument that the moment social media platforms start saying, we're not going to allow this person on because we don't want this kind of speech on our platform, as long as all the speech on social media is publicly accessible to everybody and is promoted in, like algorithmically, they essentially become a publisher like a newspaper. And therefore, if a newspaper were to tweet out a falsity, they could get sued for libel. Whereas if somebody does that on Twitter, Twitter can't be sued for that. What do you think about that sort of friction?
It's a nonsense argument made by people that have never read Section 230 in their entire life. I think the Section 230 protections are good and essential for platforms to be able to function. Just because somebody decides what type of speech they do or don't want on a particular platform doesn't mean they magically have come to the status of being a publisher. I think that platforms that host content from other people should be liable if they fail to act against stuff that is infringing on certain laws. So like the hosting of obviously, like copyright violations or offensive material that people would report, like child pornography, stuff like that. I think that this type of stuff obviously should be acted upon, but as long as they, in good faith, enforce the laws of the United States insofar as they're requested to, then I think they should enjoy those protections. I mean, we can think about getting rid of them for the worst things that we can imagine, and we can say like, oh, good, yeah, now they won't be able to be biased. But if you're engaging in anything like with any amount of intellectual honesty, you should always think of like, well, okay, let's say I enact this thing. What's the worst application of this particular thing? And we can imagine a million different ways that removing Section 230 protections because you ban certain users just doesn't work. Like if I create a social media platform where every single day I want everybody to post like the cutest cat pictures they have, and then a bunch of assholes show up on my site, start posting dog pictures, and I say I'm banning every single user that posts a dog picture, have I lost my Section 230 protections? And now if some guy posts like a video of him like hurting a cat, am I like criminally liable now for creating this kind? Like it just doesn't, none of it makes sense. Like the Section 230 protections are essential. Just because you ban certain types of speech from your platform doesn't magically make you a publisher. I do agree that intuitively, it feels like there's something wrong about a large social media platform selectively enforcing certain political points of view. But the idea of using the hammer of like removing Section 230 privileges as pretending that fixes anything, I think is ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, part of the problem with this is that there's just so much content on social media. Like a newspaper is publishing a handful of writers like hand-selected in a way that social media companies hand-select who aren't on the platform rather than hand-selecting who is. That seems to be the difference. And maybe that's the principal distinction between what really makes you a publisher is like what you're hand-picking, whether it's who writes or who doesn't write.
Yeah, handpicking and approving, right? It's not like anybody can submit. I mean, you can write comments in the New York Times, but they don't just have like random articles posted by random users. Like they commission people to write these, and then an editor reviews it, and then they publish it under their name. And
to approve a certain set of content in a newspaper doesn't mean you disapprove of everything that you didn't put in there. Similarly, to disapprove of a certain kind of content on social media doesn't mean you approve of everything that is on there. Yeah. That seems fair enough to me, but it's obviously a big and more complicated question, like I say, than just sort of, well, social media is just like any other kind of private company. It's obviously got something special about it. So what do you think in terms of the encroachment of government regulations on social media? What's sort of your broad picture of how legally we should treat social media companies and what they should be legally like bound to do?
I think the questions of law are pretty simple. I don't think about them much. I think the harder thing is figuring out like what do we want it to look like, like before we even hit the legal level. And I think that's where most of the disagreement is, because the problem is you've got fundamental disagreements in the United States over what a lot of this country should look like. And I think sometimes people are a bit too keen to blame the system when the problem isn't the system. The system is actually working quite well. The reason why nothing is working in the system right now is because the people that it's representing are historically and genuinely divided against each other in terms of what they want. So, I mean, like I've got thoughts personally for what I think social media companies should or shouldn't look like, but I mean, there's going to be a lot of people that don't have any idea like where they would even begin to have those discussions. Like, again, like a lot of people will say things like, oh yeah, like we should ban everything, everything hateful. And,
Right.
well, what counts as hateful? I think generally social media platforms are kind of revolving around this, like what the protected categories are in the United States. So like, don't make fun of somebody's like race, gender, sexuality, stuff like that. But then even that gets a little bit weird around the edges because we see certain groups of people, for instance, could be like racist towards white people and nobody really cares about that and that doesn't get banned. Or you're not supposed to be like discriminatory against like nationalities, but obviously Ukrainians saying things about Russians or Israelis and Palestinians. Like it's really complicated. I think that fundamentally, I think the issue is democracies and everything worked when it was very educated people voting, or when you're voting by issues that can be resolved very simply by like ayes and nays. But when things are so unbelievably complicated these days, and you have to vote for like, who do I think is going to, regulate or nominate a good like Securities and Exchange Commission's head in order to crack down on market rigging in cryptocurrency environments that span like global market, like does an average person even have the slightest idea about how to vote on that? I don't know. I think we're stretching the limitations of how our government can work. And from first principles, none of us even agree on what anything should look like. So, yeah.